Welcome to Game Fondue Reviews. In this video, we're going to take a look at Holmes, Sherlock, and Mycroft. Holmes, Sherlock, and Mycroft is a two-player game in which players are competing to obtain the most of several different clue types. Let's jump right in with the description of the rules, see a few example turns being played, then I'll be back for some closing remarks. This is the setup for Holmes, Sherlock, and Mycroft. To set up, each player is going to pick a color and take the 3 figures in that color along with 5 investigation markers, which you can see here. The rest of the investigation markers are just going to form a supply nearby. Then you're going to take Dr. Watson, Mrs. Hudson, and Inspector Lestrade and put them on the indicated spaces of the board. You can see the spaces have their names on them. Then you're just going to shuffle up the rest of the character cards, and in the basic setup of the game, just deal out 2 to the day 1 spaces like so. These are totally random, but they're here right now. In a slightly more advanced version of setup, though, you can actually deal 2 to each player. They'll look at them in their hands and they'll pick 1 to place face up on each space. So each player in that way will pick 1. The other will just get shuffled back into the deck. In either case, once the 5 starting characters are laid face up, you're going to take the Sebastian Morin and James Moriarty cards and shuffle them into the deck. These are bad things that happen during the game, so you can't start with them out on the board. So for now, we're just going to stick them in like so, but they'll come up later in the game and we'll explain how they work shortly. The only thing left to do in setup is to shuffle the clue deck and lay out 4 cards face up in a line like so. I also want to point out there is a Sherlock and Mycroft card that is in the advanced version of the game. We're not going to be using that in the example playthrough, but I will explain how this card works a little later in the video. The game is played over 7 rounds represented by the 7 days as shown on the board, and each day is composed of 3 phases, which are the start phase, the investigation phase, and the end phase. The game ends after the completion of the 7th day, at which time a scoring occurs, and whoever has the most points wins. You're actually going to skip the start phase in the first round of the game, but in all other rounds of the game, what you're going to do is you're going to reveal the top card of the character deck, put it out on the next day space, so in our case it would be day 2, because these here are on day 1. So he'd come out, then you would stand up all the figures. So during the game, these guys are going to be out in places like so, and they're going to be laying down. But at this time, you would just stand them up. And that's how the start phase works each turn. There's 2 steps, just reveal a new card, and then stand everybody up. I do want to point out, though, if you get one of those blue cards, which are the bad guys, something bad's going to happen. So for instance, if we flip Sebastian Morin here, we can see that it has an effect. Both players have to leave one of their guys laying down. Then you would just resolve this, discard it, and draw a new card from the deck. So you can't just stop when you draw a blue card. You have to keep going until you get a normal character. The main part of the game, though, is the investigation phase, and during the investigation phase, players are going to move their meeples around the board and take actions. The way you do that is you're going to take a guy off a card, and then you're going to move him somewhere else where you do not have a guy. So for instance, if I want to move this guy, I can put him where any of these orange guys are because I'm blue, but I can't put him on the locations with blue. So you would take him, and you would lay him down somewhere, and you would take the corresponding action immediately. We'll get into the actions a little bit during the example playthrough, but for now, just to show you how it works. So players are going to alternate their turns, so now orange would take a turn and move his guy to somewhere he does not have a guy and lay him down and take the action. It is possible that once you move a guy from a location, you can later use that location. So next, blue would take a turn, for instance, maybe he goes here. Now orange, even though he had a guy here originally, doesn't now, so he could go ahead and lay one down there like so. It's also important to note during the first round of the game, you're going to have these guys in front of you, so you're just going to immediately lay them right on a card. They're not going to move from one card to another. They're just going to move from your area to a card laying down. Without going in each character in detail, there are a few basic action types I do want to cover, and the first is gaining investigation markers. And you can see here, if you go on Mrs. Hudson, you're going to gain 3 investigation markers, and it just has a +3 in the symbol. You always take them from the supply, and you're going to put them in your area, and these are public information. You can't hide the amount of investigation markers you have from your opponent. And you can only take as many as there are because this supply is limited, so if it ever runs out, you can't take more than are there. The next basic action type is gaining clue cards, and you can see there's usually a cost to do so. For instance, here it costs 3 investigation markers, but you get 2, whereas here it costs 1, but you only get 1. When you gain clue cards, you're going to take them from the face-up available line that you see here, and when you do that, you're going to take them and put them in matching piles. So for instance, if you later got another blue 9 here, it would just go on top of it like this, so the opponent can see how many of each type you have. There are some special cards here, and those are the wilds and the map. When you have a map, they're going to score a little bit differently at the end of the game, but we'll explain that later. Wilds, when you take them, you have to put them in a pile by itself or in a pile you already have. So for instance, if we had already taken that 9, we put that wild here, that wild for the rest of the game is now going to count as a 9 for us during scoring. But you are limited to 1 wild in each color type. So for instance, you couldn't get another wild and again put it on a 9 because you already have them here. But if you put it by itself, later on you can get a new card and put it in that group. So for instance, maybe I took these 2 cards by doing this guy's action, and I put the wild by itself and the blue here. Maybe later I got this one and I would put it on top of that. So now that wild would become 5s. But wilds can never go with map fragments because they're a special type of card, but we'll explain them more in detail during scoring. After you gain clue cards and put them in your area face up like so, you're going to refill this area to 4. So there's always 4 face up at the end of your turn. You don't refill as you draw them. So for instance, I wouldn't draw 1 with this guy, refill, draw another. I would draw 2, then refill 2 at the end of my turn like so. So that's how clue cards are typically gained. They're going to be taken face up and kept face up in your area. However, there are some abilities on characters that let you take them face down from the top of the deck. So for instance, this one I could pay an investigation marker and I would take one face down from the top of the deck and I would put it in my area in a pile of these. So all the face down ones you take during the game are going to be kept in a pile here so the other guy doesn't know what they are, but you can certainly look at your own. There is one exception here, and that's if you ever get a wild face down, you have to reveal it to your opponent. You can't keep a wild face down, and you would assign it immediately either to a group or to its own pile, like we already discussed in getting them face up. The last basic action I want to cover is discarding clue cards. During this game, sometimes you're going to be able to discard clue cards in front of you. You will always do that face down, so the discard pile is kept secret during this game. And I do want to point out, if the draw deck ever runs out, you do reshuffle the discard pile to form a new draw deck. So every round, the investigation phase continues until all players have all three of their guys laying face down on their cards. And at that point, we're going to move on to the end phase. And during the end phase, all you're going to do is you're going to check if one guy is exhausted and something is spent or exhausted if it has both players' figures on it. So for instance, if this guy had two of these guys here, he would get flipped face down. So he could not be used during the following turn. The only thing to note here is you can never flip Dr. Watson, Mrs. Hudson, or Inspector Lestrade. And in case you do, they are double-sided. So you'll realize right away that you made a mistake. The only other thing you do during the end phase is you flip face up anything that was flipped face down on previous turn. So over here, if this was already flipped face down from last turn, it would get flipped face up at this time, so it can be used in the following round. Each round is played like this until the end of the 7th round, at which time a scoring occurs. So the first thing you're going to do in scoring is everybody's going to reveal anything they had secret in front of them and put them in the correct piles. Of course, you couldn't have had a wild secret. But once all the hidden clues have been revealed, you're going to compare with your opponent based on type of clue. So for instance, let's start with this 8 here. Let's pretend I had 2 8s and my opponent had 1 8. So what we would do there is clearly I have more 8s, and you know how many of each type there is because it's the number. So for instance, there's 8 8s. I can see that I have more 8s, so I'm going to score the 8 points. It doesn't matter if you have a lot more or a little more. You get the 8 points, but you get -1 for each one your opponent has. So here we can see I have 2 8s, my opponent has 1. So that's going to be worth 7 points to me. 8 minus the 1 that he has. So I would gain 7 for those. And all the numbers are going to work exactly the same. The one catch there is if I have all of one type, I'm going to get a bonus 3 points. So for instance, if I had all of the 8s in front of me, I would get 8 total, because it's -0, plus 3. So I would get 11 for them, but the plus 3 works for anything. If you had all 3 3s, for instance, you would get 6 points. 3 plus 3. And wilds do not count toward this. You must have all of the actual clue card of that type. In the event of a tie, so let's say we both had 3 8s, nobody's going to get points for the 8s. After comparing each numerical clue card, then you're going to score maps. And maps score a little bit differently based on this chart here on the bottom of the map card. If you have only 1, you're going to lose 1 point. If you have 2, you get 1 point. All the way up to having 5, you get 10 points. So they score by themselves. Remember, wilds can never be added to map cards. So they're just going to score independently based on how many you have. It does not matter how many the opponent has. And the final aspect of scoring is if you still have a wild card by itself, like this one here, it never got assigned to a group, you're going to lose 3 points for that. Before moving on to the example playthrough, I also want to cover the Sherlock and Mycroft card, which is this card here. We're not going to use it in the example playthrough, but it is in the more advanced version of the game. And once you decide who's going to go first, you're going to give this card to the other players. Whoever goes second is going to start with this card in front of them. When this card is in front of you during your turn at any time, doesn't have to be part of an action, it can be after an action or before it, you can take any card from the clue row and put it horizontally in your area. If you choose to do this, you do refill the clue line as normal, and then you're going to pass the card to your opponent. You can also flip it over if you'd like to do so. But then they will have the same ability during their turn. They could take a card and put it horizontally in their area. And that card is reserved. Reserved cards can't be affected by any character abilities because you do not yet own them. But once you already have a card reserved, you can draw it during a later turn by taking an action. So for instance, if you were to go here to draw 2 cards, one of the cards you drew could be this card itself. So this card is for you only. You cannot draw a card reserved by your opponent. That card can only ever be drawn by you. There is a limitation here in that you can only ever reserve 1 card. So for instance, if this guy reserved this and passed this back, this guy could not reserve a new card until he had drawn this one. The only other rule change here is at the end of the game, if you still have a card reserved in front of you, horizontally in front of you, you lose 3 points, just like you do for an unassigned wild card. Let's go into this example playthrough. The players have discussed before the game. They've decided the blue player is going to go first. And remember, you skip the start phase during the first turn. So we're going to move right into the investigation phase. So for the blue player's first action, he decides to go with Mrs. Hudson. So he's going to take a guy, lay him down on Mrs. Hudson. Remember, he's laid down because he cannot be used again this turn. So he's going to go ahead and take 3 investigation markers because that's what she does. Now the orange player is going to take a turn just like that. He decides he's going to go ahead and get one guy from the area here. He could either pay 1, 2, or 3 investigation markers and draw accordingly, but he only gets to keep one card that he draws, so he's going to go ahead and pay 1, and it's from the top of the deck because that's indicated on the cards. So he's going to take it. As long as it's not a wild, he keeps it face down in front of him. The other guy doesn't know what it is. So now the blue player is going to take his next turn. He decides he's going to go here. He's going to pay 3 of these because that's the cost, and he's going to draw 2 cards from the line here. He decides he's going to go ahead with this 9 and with this 8, so he takes them. Now he refills these, so there's always 4 available for the next guy's turn. For this guy's turn, he decides he's going to go here as well, so he's going to pay his 3. He's going to take this 3 here, then he's going to take this 7 here. And again, this is refilled. And with that, the blue player is going to take his last turn. He decides he's just going to spend 1, and he's going to draw 1 card from here. He takes this 3 as well because he saw the other guy has a 3, and he doesn't want to be behind in 3s. So we flip a new card, and the orange player's last action, he decides to go here, and he's going to take 3 of these. So with that, we move on to the end phase. Now, the end phase, you basically just check if 2 people are on one thing. We can see 2 people here are on Inspector Lestrade, and 2 people are on Mrs. Hudson, but remember, they do not flip over, so nothing happens at this time. And all these guys just stay exactly where they are. With that, we move on to the next start phase. So we're going to flip this card up here. It's going to go in the next available space. And with that, we're going to stand these guys up. We're going to take another turn. Remember, they cannot go somewhere where another guy of theirs is already standing. So on the blue player's turn, for instance, this guy, if he chose to move him, he could choose to move any of them. He can't put it on either of these spaces, but he will take it, and he'll put it laying down somewhere and take an action. We're going to jump ahead a little bit later in the game so you can see some more interesting situations. Welcome back. We just finished the investigation phase in the 6th turn of the game, and we can see that 2 guys are on Wiggins here, so Wiggins is going to flip over. Also, this one was flipped on a previous turn, so it's going to flip back up. And I do want to point out Inspector Lestrade has 2 guys on him, but he doesn't flip. Remember, he's one of the starting cards, so he's going to stay exactly where he is. We're going to move on to the next starting phase. Everybody's going to stand up as normal, and we're going to play this turn out. So everybody's up, and we're going to flip a new character card. Unfortunately, it's Sebastian Moran, which means something bad happens. Everybody has to lay one of their guys down. So they're going to have to lay a guy down. They're only going to get 2 actions each this turn. The blue player is the first player, so he decides he's going to lay down this guy, and the orange player is also going to lay down this guy, so nobody could use them. But remember, this just gets tossed aside. Now we're going to draw a new card from the character deck as normal. So we get this guy here, so he's going to come out. Now blue player is going to take the first turn like he normally would. So for his first action, he's going to go ahead and go to Toby here. He's going to get 1 investigation marker for each different type of clue he has face up. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he's going to take 7 of these. That's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a whole lot of investigation markers for him. For the orange player's first turn, he decides to go right for these maps here, so he's going to lay down here. He could pay either 2, 4, or 6 investigation markers and take 1, 2, or 3 cards. He's going to pay the full 6, so he's going to get 3 cards from that line. He's going to take all 3 of those maps that you see there, and he's going to put them in his area. So the maps are all the same type, so they're going to stack together. Then we're going to flip 3 new cards, and the blue player is going to take his final turn. For his final turn, he decides he's also going to go down here, and he's going to pay 6 as well to draw 3 cards from the supply. So he's going to take those, put them in here. He's going to take this 9, he's going to take this 8, and he decides he's going to go ahead and take this 5 here. So with that, we're going to flip the rest of these, and the orange player is going to take the final turn of the game. For his very last turn, the orange player decides he's just going to draw 2 more cards by paying 3 of these. So he's going to pay 3, and he's going to take a 9, and he's going to take an 8. And with that, the game is over, so we're going to move on to the scoring at this time. First thing we're going to do is we're going to reveal all the hidden clues, so everybody's going to flip those up and put them in the corresponding piles. So we see here a 9 and a 4, and over here we have a 5 and a 7. So with that, we're going to score. We're going to start with the 3s. We can see the 3s are tied, so nobody's going to get any points for the 3s, so we can just toss them aside. Next, we're going to move on to the 4s. We can see again another tie, so no points are awarded. Then the 5s, we can clearly see this player has more 5s than this player, so he's going to get 5, which is the value of the card, minus 1, because this guy has 1, so he's going to get 4 points for these. And then next, we'll move on to the 6s. We can see another tie, because this guy has a wild card in the 6s, so no points are awarded there. 7s, this guy has 3 because of a wild, and this guy only has 2, so that's going to be 7 minus 2. 5 points for him. Remember, he got 4, this guy has 5, so right now this player is winning by 1. So with the 8s, we can see a tie. Both of them have 4, because again, he has a wild. He has a lot of wilds over here. And then 9s, we see again 4 each. And then the final thing is the maps. So we can see here this guy has 3 maps. 3 maps is worth 3 points, which is just enough for him to beat the other player. So this player wins. In its purest form, Holmes, Sherlock, and Mycroft is a worker placement set collection game, because you're basically just placing workers that take actions to generate the most points by collecting different sets of clues. One of the nice elements about scoring in this game is that the amount of points a clue is worth depends how many of that clue your opponent has. So it keeps the game head-to-head, true to the 2-player nature of the game. I do enjoy the game. I find it plays quick and it's easy to teach. You can comfortably play in 20 minutes. The estimated time is 20 to 30, but you can even go faster than that as you understand what you're doing. I think it's a real nice two-player game for spouses or people that like lighter games. There's a lot of luck in this game, with what cards flip, and you are limited in your choices by what characters come out during the game. So it might even be a good game for kids because it's not very complicated. With that being said, there are definitely some characters that are more useful than others and definitely some characters that are less useful than others. I think it might be nice if those were balanced a little more, but it doesn't really matter because you flip ones over when they're used a lot, and it keeps the game even more light. And I like the lightness about this game because there's enough strategy there to think about what you're doing, but at the same time it's just very tactical with what cards flip over. The last thing I want to talk about is the Sherlock and Mycroft card. And that does make the game more strategic with you being able to reserve cards, turning them horizontally and taking them into your area. But I don't think it adds a lot to the game because, I enjoy the lightness, so I wouldn't include that in my plays most of the time, especially not with new players. But if you want that extra little strategic push, it's a nice element there that's in the game. So if it looked neat to you, check it out. It's Holmes, Sherlock, and Mycroft.